whether everyone's already on the screen. So, but I'll just start now. Welcome, world. I should say this is, I think, truly international. My name is Ulrich Diernagel. I'm here in Berlin, and it is a true honor and pleasure to open this symposium on global dynamics and in responsible research. It's an undeserved honor because I have done nothing. It was all organized by a group of very dedicated early career researchers, but you'll hear about that in a minute. So if I can have the first slide, just a few words of introduction. Can you switch to the first slide? Or yeah, so I'm quite sure many of you have realized or you hear about manifestos and all kinds of guidelines and position papers, and so all of them are calling for in principle the same things, and it's all about improving the quality of research. It's about how we award and incentivize research and how this can be improved, and in general about more open, transparent, reproducible research. And this comes from high-level stakeholders like the G7 and the European Union and research universities and so forth. But, and if I can have the next slide, I think what's missing, or at least is tremendously underrepresented in this discussion, are topics that are related to the decolonization of knowledge. The representation of research from local communities in non-weird countries, multilingualism in open science, and how open science, if done wrong, will compound inequities. And this is why it's so great to have this, because now I think this is tackled from exactly this perspective. And so this symposium is organized by an international group of early career researchers, which have been brought together by eLife. You will hear about that in a second from Alice. And the whole idea, I think, is to provide a platform for the perspective of early career researchers who will define the future of research culture and incentivize that drive researchers' behavior. And next slide. So just a few words on sort of the context of all this. This symposium is supported by the Einstein Foundation here in Berlin, but also the Quest Center for reproducible research, for responsible research, which is also reproducible, hopefully, here in Berlin, the Berlin University Alliance and Oxford in Berlin. And I think, interestingly, it is linked to the Einstein Foundation Award for promoting quality in research, which is actually going to happen today. So tonight, in fact, we will have, we will present the winners of this, and this is also generously supported by a foundation, the Damm Foundation, and also the Berlin Senate. And what's happening is that there are there are three categories, actually one for individuals, one for institutions, and one for early career researchers. And in fact, the early career researchers, just half an hour ago or an hour ago, the finalists, there were 4 finalists, and they had a competition in front of an international jury, and the jury has this was very hard because these were super projects, and but they picked one, and I'm not allowed to tell you which one because it's a surprise that we are keeping for tonight, and you're all, I think, invited to join us for this award ceremony. I should mention what this is about, the prize. So this award, it is an award that is the promoting quality of research, and it honors those individuals and institutions or organizations and early career researchers, obviously, that have shifted paradigms or will shift paradigms with respect to research quality, and have made or will make scientific results globally more trustworthy and useful. And it's, in a way, it's the first and only award of international visibility honoring outstanding contributions to enhance the rigor, reliability, robustness, and transparency of research. Now, the only thing that remains for me is to thank all those involved, and there were many. It obviously is the eLife Ambassador Program, and especially Alice. She will have a few words for you in a second. It is clearly also Verena Heise, who stepped in last minute to help everyone to get this going, and Ulrike Panasch from the award. So they really made this possible. And of course, I have to thank the early career researchers, and you will in a second hear from them, about them, and this is something that Lamis will do. I just want to highlight all of them all of you were super, but I have to highlight just a little bit Batul. I think she has put in maybe even the most of her emotions and time into this. So thank you very much. And I will now hand over to Alice from the eLife Ambassador Program. Thanks for supporting this whole thing. And I'm really looking forward to the conference.
Thank you. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Ailish O'Carroll, the eLife Community Manager at eLife, and I'm delighted to be here today. So first of all, I'd just love to thank the Einstein Foundation for inviting eLife to partner with them for this wonderful occasion. So for all of you who aren't familiar with eLife, we are a nonprofit, peer-reviewed and open access scientific publisher. And our mission is to really help scientists accelerate discovery by operating a platform for research communication that both encourages and recognizes the most responsible behaviors in science. And you can hear more about this and our new model from our executive director, Damien, who will speak tomorrow at the symposium. So if you pop that into your diaries. But it's for us, in order to improve and reform research communication and culture, we really need to hear from our global research community. And so that is why the eLife Community Ambassadors Program was set up in 2018. So this year, so for 2022 to 2023, we have 128 eLife Community Ambassadors from all over the globe. They represent more than 50 countries and more than 20 research disciplines. And so we have over 120 different universities, institutes, labs, and research communities who are represented. And if you can look here at the big blur on your screen on the right-hand side, you have in blue, the outer circle is all of the communities. So that's all of the ambassadors. So from each different country. You probably can't see it, but there's another ring in the middle of orange names, and that is the disciplines they represent. And in the very center in gray, you have the topics, the passions that they want to change, the topics in research culture and communication that the ambassadors each want to make change in. So what these ambassadors are ultimately is a bridge for us to connect to the various communities, hear what needs to be changed, hear what needs to be done, and to bring that back into eLife so that we can make those changes. So ultimately, our ambassadors are bridges into the community, and they work tirelessly to help us make that change. So 6 of our early career researchers from this group were chosen to represent the group, and they've worked tirelessly to organize the symposium. And really, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce them to you all. And I really look forward to this symposium. If you do want to get in touch, reach out to me and I can give you more information on both eLife and our ambassadors program. Thank you. Next slide.
Well, thank you, Uli and Ailish, for this beautiful introduction. So in this slide, we'd like for you to meet us. So as has been said, we're a group of early career researchers from all around the world, from different continents. We've been working for the past 6 months trying to deliver this program to you. And of course, our goal was that we try to address as many problems and challenges that we as early career researchers face, but also try to find solutions to these problems. So who we are, we're Verena, Batul, Samuel, Hinato, Nalika, and me, Lamis. So I'd like to start off by this quote, which says that we are all water from different rivers. That's why it's so easy to meet. We're all water in this vast, vast ocean. someday we will evaporate together. So basically, no matter where we are from, no matter what the levels of our skills were, no matter what these skills were, we can always work hand in hand to enhance and improve the research culture, because we are the future of research. So it's in our hands to improve this research culture and make it healthier. So in this symposium, we're sort of trying to plant a small seed. And in this seed, we're trying to paint a better picture of the global perspectives around responsible research, especially the perspectives from the global south and the global north. And then we're hoping to highlight the problems and the challenges that are currently facing global implementation of responsible research. But we could talk about problems for years and years, but then we have to find solutions. So this is why in this symposium, we're also trying to bring up some potential solutions. And finally, of course, the end result that we're dreaming and hoping to achieve is a future of research culture where no one is left behind. And this is one of the main objectives of our symposium, is that we really don't want to leave any country, any continent behind. And we tried very hard to reflect this on the program, on the speakers, and hopefully on the audience. So as you know, the program is in 2 days, and this is the first day. So in this first day, we have 2 keynote speakers, and we have 3 short talks. And finally, we have 2 workshops, and they will be run in parallel. So I hope that you've signed into one of them at least. And then at the end, we didn't want this symposium to be like any other symposium, online symposium that everyone goes to when you just click the leave button and then the symposium evaporates. We wanted to put a permanent stamp with this symposium. So our idea is to collect all the wisdom, the points raised and the discussion during this symposium and formulate a manifesto. And this manifesto will be channeled to show ECR or early career researchers' perspectives around the global dynamics of open research, and mainly the delocalization of knowledge and the representation of research from local communities in non-wired countries, and multilingualism in open science, and most importantly, how open science, if done wrong, will actually lead to inequities. And this is absolutely what we don't want. And with that, I would like to hand over to my colleague Batul for some housekeeping information. Thank you.
Welcome everyone again, and thank you so much, Lamis, Ali, and Eilish for the intro. We are a bit behind of time, so I'm going to keep this short. We have housekeeping rules. The very first thing you need to know that we will be using an Etherpad, which I just posted in the chat. It's going to have all the slides, the notes, hopefully also the questions and answers. And we do encourage you to add your questions there, so it's not missed between all the messages in the chat. But if you can't, no worries, post it in the chat and we can move it to the Etherpad. Just so we can keep control of the time, we're just going to be receiving written questions. In the Etherpad, we also ask you to sign in and add your name. Would you mind allow me to share the Etherpad if you can? We do have an icebreaker questions at line 50. If you could meet one person from the past before your living memory, who could that be? One? We're very curious to know your answers, so feel free to share it in the Etherpad at line 50. Also, I want to mention that all the session will be recorded except for the discussion and the workshop. So questions and answers won't be recorded to encourage you to participate and make you more comfortable posting any questions that you have in mind. We also want to make sure that this environment is very safe for everyone. So we have a code of conduct, which you can find it at line 11. So if you do experience or witness any kind of unacceptable behavior, have any other concerns, please do report it to the code of conduct committee. We also happy to provide a certificate of attendance. Please add your name and the contact in the Etherpad, which you're going to find it at line 13. As Lamis also mentioned, we are working in produce some sort of manifesto, and we have also an Etherpad which is linked at the top of the Etherpad. If you would like to join that working group, please add your name and contacts there. As you can see right now in the Zoom, it says at the top live. That doesn't mean it's live stream. It just means that we have a live transcription by Otter AI. So once you click on live on Otter AI on the top right of your screen, you're going to see all that transcription. And also the last thing that I want to mention, we have a social space called Wonder that someone now is going to post it in the chat. So this is social space. Feel free to join it and socialize in it. If you have any question about what I've just said, please feel free to post it in the chat. Just for the sake of the time, I'm going to now move on to the first keynote speaker. So I'm very, very delighted to introduce Leslie Chan. I'm very, very huge fan of his books. Leslie is an associate professor at the University of Toronto, Scarborough. He's also the director of the Knowledge Equity Lab. He's one of the original signatories for the famous Budapest Open Access Initiative. He was also the VI of the Open and Collaborative Science and Development Network. If you might know it as the OCSD Net. He's currently on the board of many international organizations, including DORA and the steering committee of Invest in Open Infrastructure. I'm going to hand it over to you, Leslie. Feel free to share your screen when you're ready.
You see my screen?
We see it. Perfect.
Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for the organizers, particularly the eLife early career researchers and ambassadors for hosting this session. And I'm particularly honored to be invited because of this context. I'm excited by the diversity and the commitments of this group of early career researchers. And so it gives me a great deal of hopes in the context of what I wanted to talk about today. And so I want to make sure that I also address some of the concern of the early career researchers in the context of our discussion of responsible research and knowledge equity. Now, in the invitation to me to talk about this topic, I was asked to reflect on my understanding of sort of the global differences, the global North and global South differences in inequalities of knowledge productions, and what are some of the factors that contribute to these inequalities. But what I think I will do instead is to argue that a lot of problems within our current system of knowledge production in science is rooted in structural problems that affects not just the global South, but everybody together, particularly, I would say, early career researchers and early career researchers who are in the margins. And so this is an issue that affects everybody, but particularly amplified in the global South. As Lamis the quote indicated, we're all waters, intersecting all the time. And so what affects one community, one group, so affects everybody else, as we have learned very profoundly over the past few years because of the pandemic. So everything is interconnected. So the point is then sometimes we don't want to dwell too much on differences between global North and South, because much of the conditions that actually exist affects everybody everywhere. So any struggles, any contentions within the one community is struggles for everybody. Now, on that point, I just want to also, this is kind of a rough outline of what I'm going to talk about. I want to preface by saying that a lot of these observations are my own personal experience. I'm old enough, have experience through different stages of my careers and have observed how the academy have changed over this last few decades. And I'd like to share some of my personal reflections. And hopefully this will help us in the discussion about how the system of knowledge productions get structured into these highly hierarchical structures that are continuing to enforces certain norms and standards that are very, very difficult to alter. But again, as I said, looking at the diversity of participants in this session, I'm hopeful that a lot of these issues can be addressed and things can change moving forward. So I was a grad student in the 1980s. And looking back, of course, at that time, there were no such term as early career researchers. Even the term postdoc was fairly new in the 80s. The point I want to underscore is that higher educations and scientific productions have really changed very quickly in the last 20 and 30 years. When I was a grad student, life were, I guess, the pace were very different. And I look back, my professors, most of them were not under the same pressures as scholars today. This whole pressures to publish or perish, and now increasingly to publish with impact or perish, or even publish with a lot of impact and still be stuck in a very precarious job condition. These are the kind of issues that I didn't see in the 80s, and the kind of ramping up of competition within our own institution and across institution were not so pronounced. So I just want to emphasize that things have changed very rapidly, not for the better in many respects in terms of the working conditions and the conditions of knowledge making for many researchers, and particularly for young researchers who are just entering into the system. And much of that have been discussed by other scholars looking at how increasingly public institution has been privatized and commodified, and how publishers have taken advantage of this modes of productions in terms of thinking about productivities and quantification of productions in terms of publications. And so once this mindset about productivities have been sort of indoctrinated into the system, then publishing more and more, regardless of really who benefit, have become a kind of a norms everywhere, unfortunately. And so this emphasis on efficiency have also favor a particular notion of automation. And of course, increasingly we're seeing technology driving decision-making, even artificial intelligence deciding what topics are hot and so forth, and driving funding and attention to those research areas. I would argue that these are the kind of trends that are highly unsustainable and in fact continue to replicate a lot of structural inequities within our system. And there are lots of evidence to show that already over the last few years, in particular, over the pandemic. So I want to again highlight some of these structural problems, again emphasizing these structural problems affects all of us, but particularly detrimental to scholars in the margin and young scholars in particular. This is a map that kind of haunts me over the last 20 some odd years, and it's kind of become an obsession. This map is a representation of knowledge production, so to speak, as filtered through the lenses of citation metrics. And that is, this map shows that those countries who are highly productive in productions are showing disproportionately large scale, and those who are not seen by the lenses of metrics are sort of rendered almost invisible or very, very small, literally. And so So this map really is a particular worldview, the worldview that sees the world through a very particular narrow sets of lens of citation metrics. But of course, this is not how the world looks like. We know knowledge are being produced in every part of the world. In fact, a lot of knowledge that we now desperately should understand and learn more about are coming from some societies and communities that have been considered invisible in this map. And this is really one that is detrimental to us all. That is, so much of knowledge that are residing in different communities are not being seen as valuable and worthwhile as scientific production and inquiry and co-production. So this is the other point I want to make. Now, in the last couple of years, as I said, we see the kind of structural inequities being manifested in scientific production. And again, this notion of efficiency has been driving these kind of very, very high number of productions, favoring institutions and individuals that already have a lot of advantages. I won't go into details about these studies, but my intention is to draw your attention to some of these studies that are coming out that confirms that a lot of what we already know, that really, to put it simply, the rich are getting richer. The well-cited are getting more well-cited because of the structural advantages they enjoy. And if we continue with our current system of knowledge productions of privileging certain types of publication and certain types of so-called high-impact journal, we will continue to see these kind of concentration of elitism and the invisibilization of the global knowledge that are so widely distributed around the world. And so what I have been observing is that a lot of the mainstream discussion about open access and open science have been really co-opted by these kind of market-based thinking that are increasingly driven by the notion of higher productivity, more contribution to the economies and all these kind of things. And so funders have been also taking on this kind of mantra and saying, okay, well, we'll fund you to do these kind of research, but you have to be compliant with these kind of requirements. And so what I see is that a lot of discussion is about the technical requirements of this and that. You should have data that are fair, you should have this or you should have that, and you should conform to this or that. But rather than asking questions, who are really taking part in these kind of knowledge production, and is more always the better? Is faster always the better? So I do have question about this notion of open science as a means of accelerating or making science more efficient, because as we well know now, looking at the tech industry and how broken it is, this mantra of move fast and break things, I think has so much been embedded as the norm of way to do things with technology. And I think we really, looking at how broken our technological infrastructures are, we have to rethink whether faster efficiency and automations is really the way to go, and how these kind of mantra really play into, again, how existing power could replicate and itself. So over the last 20 years, I've been asking myself this question: will open science, and could open science really allow us to reconfigure this kind of dynamics, a concentration of power in the global north, and peripheralization of everybody else? And so this is the questions that I still trying to look at. But of course, some of the early assumptions I have proven to be wrong, because in the early days, I worked with many colleagues from around the world with this platform that was set up in the 1990s, one of the earliest open access platform. And our assumption was that if we make these journals from the global south openly accessible, they will they will be part of the global conversations of science, and that we will be able to democratize knowledge and make knowledge production more equitable. Now, to some extent, that's been true, and certainly we have come to a long way in understanding open access. But one thing we haven't really taken into account is that there are a lot of existing infrastructures that conditions how knowledge can be made and how they flow. And so simply having open access is not enough, because the network itself has its own logic, and we have not paid enough attention to how these technological networks function and how they have really created a system that favor a certain modes of production and certain way of knowledge flow. And of course, our assumptions that these networks somehow is open to all, and that we can begin to think about knowledge as a public good and govern it as a public good, has been something that we have not been able to really get a good enough handle on. Many of us struggle with this and try to understand it, but it is really a complicated system undergirded by other technical and socio-political systems that influence its outcome. And so without knowing these underlying systems, we really can't get at the service structure itself. So I think a lot of policy interventions about open science and open access are really the service intervention, functional interventions, performative interventions that deal with the obvious, but not with the underlying structures. And so in recent years, we have many scholars looking at how infrastructures themselves are really not neutral. They're embedded with power, and that the governance of these infrastructures by the already powerful really enable them to be even more powerful. And then unless we have some say in the infrastructure development, design, planning, and governance itself, we will continue to be subjected to a system for which we have very little say and little control and little autonomy. And so open science, open access has to be undergirded by a set of infrastructures that are led by communities, that are designed by community with norms and standards that align with the values and principles of the communities. Because what we have now is a lot of norms and values that are embedded that are invisible to us. Lawrence Lessig famously said 20 years ago that code is law, that computer codes embedded in our system becomes the governing principles by which we operate. And I see that in open science and open access too. We have a lot of codes that are embedded into our system, a lot of discourse about fair data and about digital identifiers, about metrics, and about rankings and all those kind of things. They're all codes that are now embedded into our system that governs the way we behave as researchers and as academics. So it is important that we ask these questions. Who set these rules up? Who are in charge of these rules that they embed into our infrastructures? Because again, they have serious consequences in terms of how we work together. And without a say in these kind of norms and infrastructures, we will continue to be subjected to a set of principles that are invisible to us. So a lot of these realizations came from work that I do with many, many collaborators over the years. In the introduction, it was mentioned that I oversee this network called OCSDNet, the Open and Collaborative Science and Development Network. And some of our research you can find in this collections and on our website. But some of the realizations that I have learned from many, many colleagues and communities from around the world is that there's really no one way to look at open access or open science, and that the diversity of knowledge and community context demand us to think about the contextual nature of these different principles and practices in different contexts. I think it would be wrong to impose a particular way of doing science on everybody, because in many communities, they already have many decades and not centuries of knowledge production practices that are important to learn from. So this notion of openness should be about not just openness to the products of science, but openness to other ways of knowing, to society, and particularly to knowledge that has been historically excluded and marginalized. And so our understanding increasingly is that just because something is open doesn't make it visible, and just because it's fair doesn't mean that it is ethical or that it is beneficial to the communities themselves. And so we have to be mindful of the condition within which these conditions are being discussed. And if we look at the literature, a lot of feminist science scholars have already reminded us of the highly situated and contingent nature of knowledge that are embedded in society, and that in order to really understand how knowledge functions, we have to be cognizant of who the knowledge makers are, their practices, and learn from those practices, because we can all benefit from these diversity of ways of knowing. I mentioned this notion of thinking about other principles, and I know you guys are working on a manifesto, and so I'd like to remind you of this indigenous principles for data governance, that yes, maybe is important to have fair from a technical standpoint, but it's also very important to remember about community perspective in terms of collective benefit, the authority to have control, the autonomy to control the data is being collected, and the responsibilities of the people who collect the data to the communities, and of course the ethics of data collections by the researcher, and the responsibilities and ethics to the communities whose data is being collected from. And so we are still learning about these many dimensions of responsibilities. And as we look at these different practices, we also had a few years ago came up with our set of manifesto. Of course, these are living documents, if you will, and we continue to learn from different community, and we would love to have more interactions with the eLife early career researchers communities and exchange ideas and build the kind of infrastructures and systems that was truly equitable to us all. I'm happy to see, and many of you are familiar with the UNESCO recommendation of open science that have been rectified by all member states last November. I'm not going to read the full text of this, but if you're not familiar with the recommendation, I would strongly recommend that you visit the website. And I'm happy to see that there was really true broad consultation of different communities with regard to what constitute open science, and they see these four pillars of not just opening scientific knowledge and infrastructure, but also opening to engagement of different societal actors and open to different knowledge systems, things that we have learned through our own research as well. And they highlight certain areas within these kind of pillars, and of course, being open to other knowledge system and particularly marginalized scholars. Marginalized scholars not only in the global south, but in the global north. We know historically a lot of different type of research are marginalized, Black feminist research, in particular, different types of economic thinking, different kind of sustainability science, there have been marginalized in the global north and further in the global south. And of course, indigenous knowledge have until recently have often been marginalized as well. So there's a lot of work and a lot of collaboration, a lot of opening up and listening that we need to engage in with regard to what constitute responsible research. And I think responsible research has to take into account these different pillars and the different practices that are highlighted in this. I just want to then amplify this a little bit then by adding that responsible research is really about socially responsible research. And of course, there are a lot of principles that has been put forth by different scholars in recent years. One regards citational justice. And I show you a slide earlier about how the 1% of the most highly cited people are being cited even more. But those citations are what I would call mechanistic citation. They're performative. They cite the same people over and over again. But the people who are actually contributed to real knowledge often are being taken advantage of. They're not given credit. They're not given the kind of deep-seated understanding that contributed original understanding in the first place. A lot of indigenous scholars, feminist scholars, scholars of colors, and are some of the original thinkers of many ideas that are not given credit. And so when we think about citation, don't think about who's most highly cited. Think about whose knowledge really have contributed to the areas of knowledge that we are dependent on. And by the same token, we have to think about the diversity of ways of knowing, not just in methodologies, but in conceptualizations, in data collections and all these kind of things. There are many, many different ways that we can learn from different existing communities, particularly those who've been involved with community-based research in and around the world. And at the same time, we have to think about how we need to move away from the so-called extractive mode of production. And by extractive, I mean often researchers go into a community, collect the data they want, the health data or economic data or genetic data, and then they go back to the lab and they publish on those collected information without contributing back to the communities from which they taken the research. And often these are harmful practices, and we have, again, lots of examples over time. And so responsible research has to be taking that into account. How do we make sure the communities that are affected by the issues that we're studying are actually going to have a say in those, how they are going to handle those issues, and have a say in how the research is done and how the benefits are going to be contributed back to the system and allow the communities to use those knowledge to benefit. So I'm going to conclude within 2 minutes. I know I'm running out of time. So I just want to emphasize that for young researchers or early career researchers, your working conditions obviously are deeply entangled with this environment and the communities within which you live. But what I see myself over the time as a person in the academia is that, again, we see the erosion of this sense of intellectual community. When I was a grad student, a journal was a community that you build your dialogue and understanding of certain subject areas around. But today, a journal is just a profit centers created by commercial publishers who extract from all of you. I hate to say, but early career researchers have really a category that increasingly being equated as a cheap source of labor, much like postdocs have been created as a categories for a source of labor for the existing production of science. And so when we think about responsible research, we have to think about responsible to whom and by whom. And I think a lot of researchers, young researchers in particular, or early career researchers, are the least powerful and least vulnerable and they're subject to working conditions that are often not of their own choosing and have much say in those conditions. So I would say, again, when we think about responsible research, we need to put the onuses on the institutions. The institution need to behave responsibly towards the early career researcher. We cannot, ask early career researchers to be taking on all these extra stuff, extra work, extra advocacy, if we don't provide them with the working conditions that are fair and responsible. And I'm thinking of the SDG number 12, which is about responsible consumption and production. And I think this is very, very appropriate when we think about scientific knowledge consumption and production as well. We have a runaway model of productions that really doesn't consider sustainability and regeneration. And so I think going forward is important that we take those into account. Now, as I speak, there are tens of thousands of university workers, graduate students, teaching assistants, postdocs who are on strike since early November at the University of California Systems. And there are also tens of thousands of university workers across the UK that are currently on strike. And there are also many, many other university and communities that are in struggle with their own management to fight for fairer working conditions. And I think ultimately, when we talk about responsible research, we have to hold the institution to account that we need to have systems that are fair to the individuals, pay equities, pay equality, and fair workloads, and of course, autonomy on the part of the researchers themselves. So on that note, I'm gonna say I'm finished, and hopefully I have time for some questions.
Thank you so much. This is very, very rich. Thank you. That's very profound.